My name is Will Smith. I'm co-founder of National Links Trust. I want to welcome everybody to the fifth webinar that we've conducted on municipal golf. Before we get really into it, I want to thank Andrew Sunyog for all the work he does for NLT, but in particular for arranging these webinars. He makes my life really easy, where I just get to show up and talk to our panelists and try to learn. So thank you, Andrew. I encourage everyone to go back and watch the others. Our first one was on Winter Park 9, and then we moved on to Sharp Park and the issues facing municipal golf in California. And then we went on to Bayou Oaks in New Orleans and Buffalo Dunes out in Kansas. So I encourage anyone who is interested and cares about affordable and accessible golf to go back and watch those webinars, which can be found on our webpage, nationallinkstrust.org. Let's quickly transition into our panelists. Thank you, Lea Anne, Mayor Tecklenburg, and Troy for joining us. I'm going to give a little bit of a bio on each of our panelists. Lea Anne Brown, she's the vice chair of the Friends of the Muni, and she's also the membership director at Bulls Bay Golf Club. She's also a founding member of Friends of the Muni. She's quite the accomplished golfer. She's been inducted to the South Carolina Golf Hall of Fame in 2012, thanks in part to winning the Charleston Women's City Amateur 13 times, including nine years in a row from 1984 to 1992. If you ever see Lea Anne on the golf course, just ask how many strokes you're getting. Mayor Tecklenburg, John Tecklenburg spent much of his career as a businessman and entrepreneur before being elected as mayor in 2016. He began his public service career for the city of Charleston when he accepted the role of Director of Economic Development in the late 1990s, where he helped to lead the revitalization of Upper King Street. Since his election in 2016, Mayor Tecklenburg has paid particular focus to helping Charleston build climate resilience to sea level rise, flooding, and drainage issues by appointing the city's first ever chief resilience officer and implementing the city of Charleston's flooding and sea level rise strategy. Lastly, Troy Miller, golf course architect, fellow graduate of the University of Georgia Masters in Landscape Architecture program, along with myself and my co-founder, National Links Trust, Mike McCartan. We go way back. Troy is the founder of Miller Golf Design, and he led the renovation of Charleston Muni back in 2020. He's a Charleston native and grew up just a few miles away from the Muni, a place where he spent countless hours as a youth learning how to play the game. He began his career working on site at Pete Dye's Ocean Course on Kiawah Island and other Tom Fazio and Jack Nicklaus golf designs throughout the Southeast. Troy's philosophy is to build a golf course that fully integrates all aspects of design, development, and operation in the surrounding communities to provide the greatest possible impact to all stakeholders. So, Lea Anne, Mayor Tecklenburg, Troy, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Lea Anne, I'm going to start with you. Can you just talk a little bit about the condition of the golf course over those many years where you were racking up all those city amateur championships?
Wow. Well, it started in 1984, and I was asked. We had just moved to the Charleston area, and they called me and said, "We need some players for the City Am. Please join us." And over the years, the golf course conditions, it would go up and down, very inconsistent. One year, I do remember on the rule sheet, they stated, take your ball, fairway, rough, wherever, to the nearest point where grass is to hit your ball. Sometimes it would be 10 feet, sometimes it would be 10 yards. It was tough conditions for many years, but unlike now where it's consistent all the time, it's in fabulous condition. And I'm just so proud to be a part of this organization, and wanted to give them back to the Muni what the Muni's given to me. And
Um,
not only for golfers, but for non-golfers as well.
yeah,
We've got some programs that we're talking about. One is the renovation of or building a pavilion near the short game area. And that can be used for not only practice, but for community parties. It can introduce the golf to the community. We're also talking about walking the back nine before nine. You don't have to be a golfer to do that. We're talking about hosting movie night, an outdoor movie projector, having pizza and food trucks, and that will encompass non-golfers as well.
great. You were a founding member of the Friends of the Muni organization. What was the impetus to start that organization, and what was the Friends of the Muni organization trying to address?
We wanted to have the community aware of the renovations that were going on. We wanted to aid in funding, not that we could match the pot for the total renovation, but we wanted to be a liaison between the city and the community to build awareness, but also on the backside, help with projects that, the city might not know about. One item in particular, they needed sharpening of their mower blades, and it was going to be a while to get everything approved. And so we just said, hey, we'll pay for that. So we're helping behind the scenes as well.
Great. Troy, you grew up at the Muni. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the role it's historically played in Charleston, both as a golf course and as a park, and as an what is the history of the golf course and its position in the community, despite what sounds like pretty flawed conditions for many years.
Yeah, absolutely, Will. So, golf in Charleston first, dating back to 1739 and really having its roots in North America and Charleston. And then as we evolved into the 1920s and the golden age of golf architecture, having Country Club of Charleston and Yeamans Hall developed, it was the first municipal golf course in the state of South Carolina, developed in 1928, opening in 1929. And the land was actually a gift from the developer of the Riverland Terrace neighborhood adjacent, and was always deemed to be a public park, public golf course. So the Jenkins family was instrumental in having the land provided for this opportunity. The golf course opened with no bunkers, just greens and tees. The bunkers were added over time by the longtime golf pro, Johnny Adams. And over the course of time, the golf course it is the largest city park we have in Charleston, which has an incredible collection of city parks. And over the course of time, the golf course has always proven to be that place that is for everyone. And so our slogan with the Friends of the Muni being for y'all, really was a pun on look out y'all, and also in the inclusion of everyone, which really has held true more so since 1961, when it was the first golf course in the Carolinas and in the Deep South to integrate. And so when Muni started to integrate in 1961, it truly did become that golf course for everyone. And for me as a kid growing up, that definitely spoke true. It's always been an affordable place to be able to go out and play golf. The conditions, as Lea Anne alluded to, we were using old technology and old methodology in how to maintain the golf course up until this renovation. Pull gang mowing fairways at 3/4 of an inch, and greens that probably were never cut greater than 1/4 of an inch. And so you had conditions that felt much more like 1929 than they did like 1991. And so, I think that despite all of that, the golf course has always had great bones, and it's the heart of the golf community in Charleston because of its proximity to downtown. And people have always cared deeply about this place. And so having a huge grassroots effort of people who just, really did want to see something good happen with what is a great asset, and just trying to enhance and brush off the dust from what had been 90 years of neglect, was really instrumental in getting this project started.
But the conditions weren't poor just because of antiquated maintenance practices, right? I mean, this golf course lies hard along the low country, the marsh. Over the decades, I'm sure, Lea Anne, you saw it. Rising sea levels is a real thing, and I'm sure year after year it got harder and harder to keep the water at bay. And I know, Mayor Tecklenburg, that was a huge part of your general vision for Charleston. Being a leader in Charleston is addressing these climate issues and resiliency issues. When you came on as mayor, what were you seeing in the community as a whole, and maybe specifically at the golf course that you felt needed to be addressed?
Well, thank you, Will, for having me, first of all. And Troy did a nice job of recounting some of the history of Charleston and the course. We're such a beautiful and historic city, and we have a beautiful and historic golf course as well. As Troy mentioned, dating back to 1739, when a shipment of golf clubs arrived here from Scotland, and also the foundation of this course almost 100 years ago in the late 20s. So it's such a meaningful part of our public realm, and I have a little lesson from my predecessor. Always look out for the public realm. It makes beautiful spaces and increases the livability of your city, and that includes a public realm asset such as the municipal golf course. And I'll be honest with you, when I was running, I'm not a golfer, I play the piano, and had 5 kids, so only had so much time in my day. Love the game, I used to play a little bit, but anyway, ran into a lot of citizens that said, "Mayor, this golf course is great, but it's tired, it's worn out, it needs some help." And then I learned that Troy amazingly was willing to donate his services to the redesign and renovation of the course. I just said, we got to raise the money to make this happen. And we had a unique combination of forces, one being the city being able to put up some funding through a recreation bond we did about a year after I got elected, along with the formation of this citizens group that's just amazing. Lea Anne, thank you for your leadership on it. The Friends of the Muni. We've now spent about $2.5 million on that initial renovation, and then we're continuing on. We have another $500,000 set aside right now to add additional restrooms on the course. That's all being worked out for a project this year, and we're going to continue on and on. So the other thing I got to share with you, Will, and maybe I'm getting off course or you would ask this later on, but it was just kind of a unique coincidence that when I moved back to Charleston, I was born here, but I went off to college and started a business somewhere else and came back in the early 80s and started attending this Monday morning breakfast meeting of some folks that were active politically. And 2 of them were elderly African-American gentlemen who were members of the NAACP during the 1950s, during the Civil Rights Movement. And the 2 of them, J. Arthur Brown and Big John Chisholm, were 2 of the gentlemen who challenged the city to desegregate this course. And that was really a historic event as well in the city and in this state, that the city of Charleston willingly moved forward to desegregate a public resource and golf course. At that point, desegregation really hadn't even gotten going in South Carolina. So it was really part of the history. You add all that up together, the history of golf here in Charleston, 100-year-old course, first course to be desegregated, you know, the beautiful asset that we have, and it was just all worth doing. So lastly, to your question about resiliency, in 2015, we had this huge 1,000-year storm, and then we've had named storms ever since. There was a lot of flooding in the neighborhoods surrounding the course. So intentionally, very intentionally, part of the renovation was to create more storage for water. We did something called the Dutch Dialogues here in Charleston after all this flooding, where we changed our mindset about water not necessarily being your enemy, but you have to be an ally and find places for water to reside and rest, and before it flows out into the outfalls into the river. And so Troy created more space. You can see behind Lea Anne, the water features are beautiful. They also increase the playability. And then we were able to open up the vistas along the river when we reinforced there. And the place is just drop dead gorgeous when you're on the back nine, particularly overlooking the Stono River. Isn't that right, Lea Anne?
Oh, it's fabulous. I mean,
Just gorgeous. So you would put all together people's course, all ages, all folks in our city can use. It's resilient, it stores water, it's beautiful. I don't know a better combination than all that. Sorry,
Well,
I was so long-winded.
Mayor, I think you could add something else, right? I mean, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I know that a lot of the stakeholders that care about affordable and accessible golf, this is something they're interested in, right? You guys invested in the golf course and turned what was a potential economic loser or drain into something that is at least breaking even or being positive for the city, right? So you combine all of those other things you mentioned, which is a lot of the stuff that we're seeing at Langston Golf Course and our courses in DC, and you add to the fact that it is actually now contributing economically, you've got a home run, right?
I would say it's sustainable, but we kept our green fees very modest. You know, everybody can play, and we have discounts for city residents and for seniors and for kids. So everybody gets to play, and it still sustains itself.
And Will, to that point, I mean, if you talk about from the financial perspective of what was done and kind of the return on investment, this is something that I feel is very important and was part of the big pitch early on to get this project going. The golf course typically lost between $50,000 and $100,000 a year prior to the renovation. In the first year out after the renovation, the golf course made almost $700,000 positive. And so that was a huge swing and much more than we had even projected that it could do. And again, in terms of affordability, maintaining that local rate at $18 and not having to change the affordability component on the local front. And then the model really, to me, that I'm always trying to preach to our local players is no different than what you're very familiar with the UK and the Scottish model of, we want that outside play. We want 10% of our play to be those out-of-towners. We've got 8 million tourists coming to Charleston every year. And if we can capture, 6,000 to 7,000 rounds a year out of those 8 million folks playing at a premium, which is still at a normal public daily fee rate for Charleston, that's going to subsidize this project going forward for years and years to come. And so our local player who's out there and should be proud of what we have here should be welcoming of those out-of-town license plates to say, we're glad you're here. Thank you for spending your money with us, because it means that it's going to be that much better for us in the future. So trying to really ingrain that model of the British model of affordability for the locals and really making it a destination for our 8 million plus tourists that are coming to Charleston now, I think is the path forward for us to continue to sustain.
Yeah, I mean, Troy, when Mike and I came down and played last, I guess it was April, we were more than happy to pay the out of town rate and felt like we got good value at whatever it was, 60, $65 at that point. And then when someone, I think someone I played with said, you know, for the locals pay $18, I was just absolutely blown away. I mean, that's an unheard of number. I don't want to actually say it too loudly on this golf on because you know it's just the economics in DC don't work that well. We believe, you know, our whole mission is affordability and accessibility, and $18 is an unbelievable number. So
Well,
The Will, if I may add, we started doing a much better job of tracking where our players were from. And in South Carolina, hospitality accommodations law, it allows us, if we can prove we've got so many visitors playing, we can subsidize our budget with a little bit of accommodations funding that we get a hotel tax, so to speak. So we now track that percentage very tightly, and every year we're able to allocate a portion of the Muni budget from accommodations fee.
absolutely, because we are putting heads in beds now, which is a big part of that metric. So, Will, one other thing before I got to tell a story that goes back 20 plus years that was instrumental in this happening. You know, between you, myself, Mike McCartan, sitting in a room in Athens, Georgia, hearing you say cheap golf doesn't have to mean bad golf, and
Right.
was something that Will had really kind of talked a lot about. And I think that's exactly the purpose of a lot of these municipal efforts is we want to make affordable golf interesting and exciting. And so that for me resonated 20 years later, thinking about how to make this golf course a place that was both playable from a conditioning perspective, and from a playability perspective, and accessible at a low rate, cost wise for everyone who wanted to come play the game. So these things definitely evolve over time, but that was also the beginnings, I guess, of Mike's thesis with East Potomac Park. So these things, you know, they come to fruition eventually.
well, let's dive into the architecture. I mean, one of the theses of NLT that we're trying to show certainly is that engaging golfers architecture, that to invest in it, there's return on it by getting more people involved and engaged. And certainly what you've accomplished at Muni, and certainly talking about the numbers, seems to be bearing that out. So Troy, maybe dive into a little bit about your thought process about you know, what you wanted to accomplish through the renovation, both from an architecture standpoint, and then also from Mayor Tecklenburg touched on it on a water retention resilience standpoint, because obviously it had to go hand in hand.
Absolutely, yeah. And will you okay if I share my screen just to show one image?
Sure.
Okay?
If I don't know if you have access to it, I'm not sure.
I do, and oh no, never mind. Okay, so I should have checked. So yeah, so let me start by saying, you know, Charleston is a historic town and has a lot of historic firsts, and a lot of great history in this town. And for one of the things that I think is very important is the pedigree of Seth Rayner architecture that we have in Charleston. So in the 1920s, both the Country Club of Charleston and Yeamans Hall were designed by Seth Rayner and built in the mid-20s. And when this golf course was in its infancy and being constructed and being thought of for the first time, Rayner had since passed away, but you know, is the only two examples of golf in Charleston were the Country Club and Yeamans Hall for them to go off of to go build. And so a lot of the same laborers and a lot of the same players were involved. J.M. Whitsitt was a Country Club of Charleston champion who was credited with the initial layout and routing. So as we talked about what to do from an architectural perspective, I really wanted to lean into this idea of showing off this Seth Rayner, C.B. McDonald style of architecture, which is largely inaccessible to the general public. As you think about Rayner and McDonald architecture, almost entirely that is a private portfolio of golf courses. And it is such a unique and special style of architecture to be able to bring these template holes to life in a publicly accessible arena, in a very visible arena, with the Redan and the short and cape and road and barrettes and a punch bowl and a double plateau. You know, for the architecture geeks, the one percenters out there, I think it's something that is unique. And also just for the the kind of follower, just generally follower of golf, seeing the starkness of the angles and the style of architecture, it's different. It stands out, and so my hope was to really provide that level of architectural inspiration to these holes. And then when it comes to the resiliency factor, that was something that was the most important thing. Drainage, not only from a stormwater perspective, but also from a sea level rise perspective. And I'll tell a story on my wife, Emily, who is a meteorologist and heard me talking prior to the renovations as we were planning about elevating a few of these holes 3 or 4 feet along the Stono River. And I got off the phone and she looked at me and she said, "You mean 5 or 6?" And I said, what are you talking about? And not even realizing she had been paying attention. And she goes, "If you're going to truly stand up and believe in what you say and say that you're going to create this golf course for generations to come, you better plan for generations to come." And so we did. And so the holes directly adjacent to the Stono River, the 13th hole, the 15th hole, those holes were elevated significantly. And we also were able to create, and by using a lot of the material in these additional stormwater capacity areas that are a little out of play in between golf holes, we were able to elevate those holes with that material and create much greater stormwater capacity for these more and more frequent 4, 5, 6 inch rainstorms that we get in the summertime and spring. And so so the combination of factors have really, what it's done is it's created a better environment, both on the freshwater stormwater side and capacity on that, as well as keeping from transference happening between the saltwater environment of the Stono River and the marshes and what are the golf course ponds. So that lack of transference has actually increased the environmental quality of both environments, as well as provided stormwater capacity that not only made the golf course more playable by moving the water away from the areas of play, but it also allowed for us to get the water out of the ditches from the surrounding communities. And what that did was it basically created less volume in the neighborhoods. So the ditches no longer were full after a rainstorm. It allowed those ditches to be piped and for sidewalks to be introduced in these neighborhoods for the first time in history. And so that is one of those residual benefits of improving the storm drainage and the stormwater retention downstream, sucking the water out of the residential areas. And now all of a sudden, people who've been walking on unprotected shoulders are going to have the opportunity to have sidewalks in their neighborhoods, and not stormwater in their ditches and in their yards. And so all of these factors played into gaining support from not just the core golfer or the architecture geek or the history buff, but also from the community at large, who does want to see the impacts of these public efforts have some benefit to them as well.
And Lea Anne, I'm sure you get out there and play quite a bit, but what's the end result?
It's fabulous. The green complexes are very difficult, but fun and challenging. And I would say the course is at least 3 to 4 shots more difficult. But the more you play, the more you enjoy it. And I absolutely love the renovation.
So, Lea Anne, I know it's 3 or 4 shots harder, but you probably don't lose any more golf balls, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And the one thing that I really, the absolute best compliment that I've heard for the golf course is hearing folks say, "You really have to think your way around this place now." And to me, that is like the ultimate compliment, because I think learning to play the golf course, using the contours, as long as we maintain the firmness of the approaches and the green complexes and are able to use the contours that are significant, and they're more significant than you'd probably build in a modern golf course. But that's primarily because it's comforting to know at a municipal golf course, you're not going to have green speeds of 12 or 13. And you can kind of design for a 9 or 10 on a stimp meter. But being able to use those contours and move the ball around on the ground, I think does probably add there's a lot more birdies and a lot more double bogeys out there today than there were before. Let's put it that way.
You agree with that, Lea Anne?
I agree with that.
All right.
I just want to say, Troy and Mayor, I am just so proud of the Muni. And I mean, it's just a true gem for Charleston. And to be a part of this is fantastic.
Well,
And I want to say to all the people that are watching that haven't played the Muni, you need to come play the Muni. It is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Well, Will, one thing to keep in mind too is it's about the players, the folks involved with this process and actually making it happen, and kind of how this whole thing evolved. I look back at initial conversations with Mayor Tecklenburg and with his chief of staff, Rick Giroux, who is a golfer and gets it and is passionate about it. You know, having key stakeholders in the community like Lea Anne, like Bert Atkinson, who was our past Friends of the Muni chair, Leonard Long, who was the developer at Kiowa, was our first chair of the Friends of the Muni. Having those key stakeholders who can see it and are passionate about it and have a connection to what the golf course was. And that also held true of the actual employees on the site. I mean, $2.5 million for the renovation that we did is, I won't call it shoestring and bubble gum, but it was an incredible amount of work for the budget that we had. And that was because of guys like Brooks Carpenter, who I see watching right now, who was working on the grounds crew and spent countless hours making sure that it was as good as it possibly could be during construction. We had people that worked in the snack bar laying sod on greens and painting the clubhouse during the closure. That kind of community buy-in is huge. And a lot like I see with the National Links Trust, where you have these volunteer days. We had a volunteer day where we had a lot of the players come out and plant landscaping around the golf course as part of the finishing touches right before we open. And that's a fun thing to see, and it creates buy-in at the grassroots effort that is equally as important in my mind to getting the big donations. So.
Yeah, no, and that's a common theme that we've heard through this webinar. You know, I forget what they called it at Winter Park 9, but it was basically, you know, they would come out and lay sod at the end. The community, members of the community came out. A lot of the work that's been done at Buffalo Dunes has been just straight volunteer efforts through firefighters and various members of the community. And it's obviously cuts down on costs, but it really does develop that political buy-in from the community, and it shows that political buy-in. And Mayor Tecklenburg, I guess, you know, was it a fight to get this money appropriated to invest in the Muni, or were you able to get it through without too much trouble?
Well, as I mentioned, it came at a good time when we were considering other recreation improvements around the city. And so it was one of those kind of compromise situations. We build this rec center over in your part of the city, and we improve this pool over here. We want to do the golf course over there. So it was a bond where each major part of our city had some component, and the golf course was the main component for James Island. So it came at a good time. I did want to follow up, Will, if you don't mind, on the sustainability point that Troy made about the rainfall, because earlier I had just mentioned the big 1,000-year storm in October of 2015, and then the named hurricanes that we've had since then. Sea level rise, when I was a kid, you know, you only had an occasional few days a year where high tide might actually come over and cover a city street in Charleston. Last year, it was 90 times. And I remember Troy and Lea Anne driving over Maybank Highway and seeing the whole back end of the golf course covered with salt water coming. In fact, it was killing the grass in various places. I mean, it wasn't just a hurricane event that we're seeing in Charleston now. This, we've documented our own sea level rise in Charleston Harbor over a foot in the last 100 years, and the rate of increase has quadrupled in the last 20 years alone. So this was real, and the opportunity for Troy to design that thing to basically create a berm, keeping the sea level rise at bay for at least a few decades, and also adding to that stormwater component was just brilliant. So was just what we needed at the right time. And changing topics about the play, the opportunities that we've been able to open up for kids to play and expand our first tee program and our recreation program for young golfers and kids has been amazing. For students, caddie scholarships, because I do know enough about golf to know that it's not just a sport. It builds character, it builds leadership. The concept involved in playing golf really extend to building integrity and character if properly taught and utilized at a facility such as this. So the benefits are just manifold.
So,
Yeah.
to
Lea Anne,
that, go ahead, Leah. Go ahead, Will.
Lea Anne, you talked a little bit about in the beginning about some of the outreach to non-golfers. Can you talk a little bit about follow up on the mayor and talk about how junior golfers are using the facility now?
They put in a short game area, which is fabulous. I don't know how large it is. You could probably ask Troy that, but there are 3 large greens and they're elevated, and so you can pitch and putt and chip, and there's no cost involved in that. You just come to the Muni and bring some golf balls and some clubs, and it can be a family affair. It's a fabulous new facility, and the putting green, there is a putting green close to the parking lot and the clubhouse. This is totally separate from that. So you're allowing, I don't know how many people, 20, 30 at a time, to all be able to pitch and putt and work on the short game, introduce people to the game that have never played before. It's right there. It's complimentary, and it's always in good shape since it's been open, and come test your skill.
That's great. Troy, maybe you could talk a little bit about the Muni's efforts post renovation to reach out to underserved communities to get them further introduced to the game of golf and introduced to the Muni.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as it relates to teaching the game and playing the game, as Lea Anne alluded to, the new short game area was kind of found land. It was an old water tower that had been decommissioned and taken down, and we now have this, what we call the wedge, is our little 3-hole short game area with a putting course, and that has basically created capacity that we never had before to be able to teach more kids. So pre-renovation, we went from roughly about 280 kids in the programs to nearly 1,000 within 18 months of opening, which is just incredible numbers and growth. Still have demand that can't be met. Some of that is human capital and some of it is space. But again, continuing to try to serve those communities. Some of the things that we've done have been outreach in terms of trying to get the whole family involved, people who have not been involved with golf before. And then one thing that I'm tremendously passionate about that I feel great that we've been able to do, and is largely because of National Links Trust efforts in doing the same, is the Evans Caddie Scholar Program through the Western Golf Association. And so last summer, we started the Evans Scholar Caddie Program at Muni with roughly 10 to 12 kids that have continued to do loops. We've had a couple of caddy managers that have come through, one of which is a PGA Tour pro and grew up on Muni as well, and has helped us in his off weeks to manage that caddy program. And I just can't speak highly enough of what the Evans Scholar Program provides in terms of opportunity. And by the way, 9 out of 10 of these kids that came to start as 8th and 9th graders to start caddying at Muni had never been on a golf course. And so opening up the game to these children, these kids, and having the opportunity to go on to get a full scholarship to a number of schools around the country, and really introduce caddie culture to Charleston, which it's never really had before. All of these things open up the doors to get us a greater group of people who are interested in being at Muni and utilizing the facilities and having some passive knowledge of golf, if not just being part of that greater golf community.
It's great stuff. I want to just circle back quickly to the resident, non-resident fee breakdown. It sort of alluded that there might be a little bit of tension between the local golfers and the visitors. What are you doing to educate local golfers on why it's important, and how's it being received? And any thoughts for anyone who might be listening and operator who might be thinking about doing something similar?
You want me to take that one?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw it to you, Troy. Yeah.
Okay. Give me. All right. So the non-resident versus the resident, I think it's really important to understand. When we first pulled this whole thing together, there was a pro forma that basically said we were looking to subsidize this thing through some out of town play. And honestly, I think it's mostly about programming and education and communication and making the players aware of the fact that this is a valuable asset, something we should be proud of and want to share with all of our guests and all of our tourists that come to town. Managing the expectations of the players and being able to understand, see the benefits of that and be able to participate in that and get buy-in from them, I think is probably the single most important part to being successful and being able to incorporate those programs. But I did see the question about, basically what $18, $20 local rate, $60 for the non-resident. I would like to see that number grow based on demand, not based on, in rounds. I'd like to maintain that 10% kind of out of town round play, so that we do have 90% of the available tee times, which generally are all taken right now, for our local player.
Along with that, there's a question about the maintenance budget, if it increased pre-renovation, post-renovation. And I assume that part of the revenue that comes from the out-of-town play can, allows for an increased maintenance budget.
Absolutely. We've increased the maintenance budget going forward. I must admit, I don't have an exact number in my head, but the whole realization of this story in the course getting to the condition it got to, which was, as I mentioned earlier, pretty worn out, was the realization that when we did the renovation, we needed to keep it up better. And so we made a firm commitment to that, and the sustainability of the course. I mean, Troy mentioned a number. We're pouring a lot of that money back into increased maintenance budget. As I mentioned, we're adding new bathrooms. This year, we're working with the Muni for future plans to improvements to the clubhouse and a little pavilion area that we want to do. So there's more to come for the Muni. It's got a great past, but a great future ahead of it. And yes, maintenance is a critical part of that.
And Mayor, just to follow up a little bit on that, I know a lot of our viewers are interested in the concept of a public-private partnership and how that might be able to benefit their community or their golf course. Can you just talk a little bit about how it's been in Charleston and the importance of it going forward?
Well, the partnership with the Friends of the Muni ended up being essential to getting the renovation done. I think even though I mentioned how that bonding worked out favorably, it wasn't the complete budget. It was only about 2/3 of the projected renovation cost. We were relying on our citizens to come together and support this effort. We felt that they would. We counted on it. It happened with Lea Anne's leadership and some other folks that were mentioned. And so that's a model that can continue forward. And honestly, the city has used that model for other mostly cultural arts initiatives like the Spoleto Festival, where the city started it, put seed money into it, but we partnered with a independent board we created and rely on them heavily to make that cultural arts festival happen every year in Charleston. So it's a model that can really work when you have citizens who care about where they live and want to continue to make it the best place that it can be. And this is just one piece of that. Thank you, Lea Anne, for your efforts.
You're welcome.
Well, unless any of the panelists have anything else they want to get across before we sort of open it up to some questions, let me know. I'll speak now or we'll move on. Great.
Good.
Well, Mayor, I know you've mentioned the bathrooms being installed. I know that was a big hurdle, and that's great. And I know maybe Lea Anne, we could talk a little bit about the vision for the halfway house, snack bar, and clubhouse, which I know people who have visited are saying this is great. What's next? Because everyone's super excited by the whole project. So Lea Anne, do you have any thoughts on the halfway house?
We're hoping to get that started in the near future, but it'll be near the correct me if I'm wrong, Troy. The pavilion's going to be near the short game area. Is that correct?
Yes.
So not only will it be helpful as the halfway house, but also families and civic groups that want to entertain a small get together. We're hoping to utilize this for that.
Great.
As well as in the long run, the clubhouse. We're hoping to renovate or rebuild a new clubhouse. That's definitely a long range plan, but adding a second story for community space for civic groups and meetings and non-golfing affairs as well.
That's right. Yeah, and I think the pavilion too, from a kids programming perspective, the ability to have a place to house for all the junior camps that we're doing, as well as have this, outside of golf community events. At the end of the day, that's the goal of this whole project, is to make the Muni a community center beyond just a golf course, to be able to host kids, be able to have space for baby showers and weddings and any events that our local community want to hold. And so trying to make it more of that gathering place in the community center, not just a golf course, I think is a big part of the goal. And programming from a Friends of the Muni perspective is definitely at the top of the list of being able to include more programs like the Evans Scholars, looking at various different opportunities to provide some apprenticeship programs for kids in the community, and just generally creating a safe space that we can expose more people to the game of golf.
Right. Well, thank you all. I'm just gonna sort of run through some questions that have come through, and anyone who wants to answer can jump in, I guess. I'm gonna start with Alex. I'm not gonna pronounce his last name. Hey gang, I'm an Evans Scholar, not from the area, but visit friends who live there and played the Muni. Pre and post renovation, the changes are great. Are there any salt marsh restoration enhancement efforts along the Stono River to help with coastal flooding in the region?
I would say generally what we have is protections. More and more the critical line and going across the critical line, which we didn't have any impacts on salt marsh, are direct impacts during this construction, which is largely the case in the Low Country and in Charleston. The key and the critical piece is trying to enhance those environments by protecting them from increased stormwater runoff, increased pollutants from the upland side, by creating better stormwater capacity before they outfall. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of that, and the benefits of that, having a strengthened salt marsh environment that isn't depleted by pollutants or fresh water, makes it a stronger environment that actually does do a better job of retaining some of the tide water that we deal with. But generally speaking, that's things. The biggest thing is protecting what's there from a marsh perspective.
And if I could add to that, we're looking at purchasing the kind of the last undeveloped property adjacent to the course that includes some marsh and saltwater wetlands to preserve it, to keep it from future development, to preserve that vista that we currently have. That's one example. And there's another property, just one property away, Fort Pemberton, that we recently bought as well. It's got some history associated with it, both from Civil War and Revolutionary War, but another waterfront access point for a blue trail of Charleston, but to also preserve the site from future development and to preserve those wetlands. So it is mostly preservation. We did not have any required mitigation from the construction that we did.
Great. There's a sort of a follow-on question about soil here. Was there a significant amount of peat due to its history of poor drainage? That's from Justin Lawson.
Yeah, no, most of our drainage issue isn't necessarily soil based as much as it is elevation based. Being very flat, we're basically between somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 feet of elevation up to about 15 on the golf course, but most of that falls between 4 and 8. And so it's really the poor drainage had more to do with being flat and not being able to move the water to various places. So one of the things that we definitely did was cut some ditches off to kind of wick water out of what is low-lying area, high water table areas. The third hole is a good example of that, where we created a creek bed that runs through the golf hole and basically acts as a wick on what is otherwise a very flat golf hole. And as opposed to trying to move a lot of dirt to create sheeting off of water, we were able to wick a lot of that water into this creek bed. So soil wasn't an issue as much as elevation and lack of slope was.
Yeah. Quick question from Teresa. How big is the first tee program that operates out of there?
Yeah, so our first tee program for the greater Charleston area, Bucky Dudley is our executive director, and I'm going to misquote the number of players that we have on an area-wide basis. But like I said, between the first tee programs and our own U.S. Kids programs, which Boykin Powers, our director of golf, provides, and the junior programs are greater than 1,200 kids now in the program. And again, that's about 400% above where we were pre-renovation. And then we also have programming, PGA Hope, and other adult programming that brings in not just junior players to teach them the game, but also adults that are coming to the game later.
All right, I'm trying to figure out where to go here. Lea Anne, question on what's your favorite hole on the golf course is and why? And I'll let Troy answer that as well. And Mayor Tecklenburg, you can weigh in. I know you're not a golfer, but maybe you've been out there and you got a.
I love the snack bar. They have the best hamburger, best cheeseburger in town.
Yeah,
I agree with that one. I would say number 11 is my new favorite hole, just because of the green complex. And if the pin is on the left, you can aim it to the right side of the hole and let it feed down toward the pin. It's not an easy up and down if you go long. That happened to me in the mixed team twice, especially with the back pin. You want to be conservative on that hole. The middle of the green is just fine. What about you, Troy?
Yeah, so, well, first, Lea Anne's choice, that was recently named in Golf Digest as one of the best redans in the country you can play, which was a nice honor. My favorite hole, probably because it's the culmination of all of the different focuses that we talked about, is 13. The 13th hole is Stono. It's the road hole. And it's kind of a Franken hole for you template experts out there. It's got kind of some elements of a bottle hole. It's got a principal's nose in the center, and then it's got the road hole green complex with the road hole bunker front left. And so the widest hole on the golf course, and it provides some options to be able to go left or right depending on where the pin is on any given day. And also because it's the one that changed the most. It was elevated between 5 and 7 feet from where it was previously. Anytime the tide was high, king tide or not, that fairway was covered with water. Today, it's probably the firmest fairway we've got. And it sits adjacent to the new 6-acre pond where all that water can get to and filter out before it goes back into the Stono. So 13 is mine.
Well, that was my favorite hole, my when I spun around it. So it's a great spot. Beautiful, very playable. Maybe the biggest green out there, and yeah. Yep,
very close to it. 1 and 13 are close, very close in square footage.
Yeah. Well, we're up on time. There's a bunch of other questions, but I don't want to. You guys have been so generous already with your time, and we really appreciate. This is a great story. It's an ongoing story, so I know we'll continue to be in touch and learn more about what's going on at Charleston Muni, and look forward to having Troy, you come up to DC and take a look at what we got going on here, and Mayor and Lea Anne, please come up. And I can't thank you enough. It's been a wonderful hour speaking with you.
And remember, for y'all.
That's what I was going to leave us with. friendsofthemuni.com. We're still out there trying to continue to raise awareness and continue to do things to be beneficial to here. I saw a couple of the questions. 7 days in advance at 7 a.m. If you want a tee time as an out-of-towner, set your alarm clock. And we're going to get you a Muni hat up at Washington Golf and Country Club here shortly too. I think that, and it's not a Rainer. It wasn't a Rainer golf course to begin with. Rainer was long cold by the time the golf course was a thought. So
yeah, follow up with me. I can tell you about the backstory. You missed the beginning of it. Lea Anne, thank you. Mayor Tecklenburg, thank you. Troy,
Thank you, Will.
we really appreciate it.
Guys.
Thank you, Will.